Ladies and gentlemen, Mary Kramer, Director of Detroit Homecoming.
Good evening. If I could ask you to please take your seats. A little different for a cocktail party venue, I'd say, but the reason that we're doing it this way is we want to have a lovely dinner outside and that it's not conducive for a formal program. So we're doing that first indoors. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the first fully in-person Detroit Homecoming since 2019. We did have a great event. We had a great hybrid event last year, and I know many of you attended that, but this is no virtual. We're just all in person and videotaping. Another first, we are holding all of the programming in one location, which is here, the Icon, to celebrate Detroit's riverfront, which if you've been paying attention to our homecoming newsletters, you know that for 2 years in a row, USA Today named the Detroit riverfront the best in the U.S. Yeah. Now, I think a lot of the people coming in from out of town remember the days when we had cement silos and parking lots and weed-infested vacant lots. And now, over the next 2 days, you're going to see more of the riverfront. We're going to be showcasing major investments in our city, in mobility, in innovation, entrepreneurship, the arts, and design. But much of the transformation is rooted in public-private partnerships. And I want to shout out a few folks because they also support homecoming. The for-profit investments like General Motors, Ford Motor Company, Bedrock, which owns this building, and many more real estate investors. The public dollars, City of Detroit, you're going to hear from the Mayor Duggan tomorrow. State of Michigan, you're going to hear from Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist later at dinner, and the federal government. And then philanthropic funds. Now, much of that is from the private foundations that were founded by very familiar names to Detroiters. An example of how that money has been invested in the riverfront, the Ralph C. Wilson Jr. Centennial Park, it's going to be on the West Riverfront, and it was named in honor of the founder of that namesake foundation that provided a $40 million gift to create an asset the entire city and region can enjoy. That park will also have a William Davidson sport house. And closer to where we are, there's a Valade Park, which is named for the family that owns Carhartt. So you're going to hear how private families, families that are institutional names in Detroit, are still playing a major role in our city. So I want to thank all of those foundations and companies. I especially want to thank our key partner, the Downtown Detroit Partnership. Eric Larson, the CEO, moderated a fabulous program today for real estate, but tonight's his wife's birthday, so he has his priorities. He is not here, but there is a great team from the Downtown Partnership, our fiduciary for homecoming. And I want to just thank you all for being here. You could feel the energy in the cocktail hour. It is so exciting to have you all here with us in person, and we believe that with the energy that's created in the room and in the programs and in the one-on-ones and the informal chats, you're going to find your own way to reconnect with this great city. I call your attention to the outcomes section in the program book this year. We always try and highlight people who have done wonderful things in the city. And tonight we have probably our best outcome. Colleen Robar and I think that Tudo and David Wessner and their baby, Jonas, they met at homecoming. They moved home, and baby Jonas is with us tonight, too. So with that, let's start the program.
Ladies and gentlemen, Ben Will, winner of the 2022 Motown Mike Spoken Word Artist of the Year.
Good evening. I'm so excited to be invited to share space with you all. The piece that I'm going to share that won me the 2022 title of Motown Mike Spoken Word Artist of the Year is called, thank you, it's called Griot's Tale, The Blue Building on the Boulevard. Gather round, good people. Come closely into this light. Allow the luminescence to lure you into what we declare to be a safe space, a sacred place that welcomes all, regardless of race, creed, class, or any other construct man-made to confuse you. This glorious institution, this edifice of enlightenment, this abbey, filled with sacred texts and hymns enshrined behind beautiful blue walls, was made for each and every one of us. And I ain't talking about no church. We call it Hitsville, and the man with the God-given plan to sacrifice his all to share messages of love and hope with the entire world does sound similar to Jesus when I say it like that. But in our story, his name was Barry. And Barry was begging his big sister to hold $20 times 2 times 20 to get the 800 he needed to start a record label. And Esther said, "You mighty bold asking to hold, because ain't you the same little brother who had to fold after opening a record store that never sold a thing?" And I'm certain that Barry looked himself in the mirror that morning, pushing past the doubt of what he couldn't be, to proudly proclaim, "My failures don't define me. And regardless of what I did or didn't get, my spirit told me I ain't done yet." Because he looked at Esther after she accurately audited and assessed each one of his missteps and replied, "Yep, that's me. And I'm going to take that money and build a legacy. It's the resiliency for me." Something like a fairy tale, but baby, Rumpelstiltskin ain't got nothing on this. He spun straw into gold. Barry started spinning out hits, forging gold, platinum, diamonds, if you get my gist. What kind of wizardry is this? Barry is an alchemist who harnessed the potential of a house rundown in the same town that tried to clown you, converting kitchens and garages into his prized laboratory, his workshop, his assembly line that didn't just produce stars, it produced wonder. Supremely, marvelously tempting things Barry made. Well springs, they say. 4 men drank from it and rose to the top, they say. The closer you get to it, you'll realize it sounds better when it's a little smoky, they say. Barry once gave a young man the power to walk on the moon. Something strange happens inside of that blue building on the boulevard. And that's the secret, ain't it? Because in the building Barry brought between a funeral home and a salon, in the space between the birth of beauty and death, Barry made magic, and that's the moral. Yeah, Barry made Motown, and Motown made America, made us all some incredible music, but Barry also gave us hope. He gave us love. He gave us power. And he taught us all in the music that when you quiet that voice that tells you what you can't do, you will find your magic too. Thank you. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Hewell Perkins.
Wasn't Ben Will phenomenal? That was fantastic. Wow. Exceptional. The power and majesty of this great city we call home can be found not only in iconic buildings and businesses, but also in iconic families. Welcome home, everybody. Whether you're here for the first time or here for the 9th time, welcome home. We're going to briefly talk about families that are making a big difference in our communities, because those families represent the best of who we are. When you think about the Ford Foundation, the Kresge Foundation, the Skillman Foundation, the Ralph C. Wilson Foundation, Motown, the William Davidson Foundation, these institutions are investing and encouraging us to be our best selves. But there's always a family behind them. And today we're going to meet 2 members of amazing families that have contributed greatly to the success of Detroit. First, I'm going to bring out a woman who represents the family of Motown. She and her wonderful grandmother, Esther Gordy Edwards, were here to help establish the Motown Museum, and she, Robin Terry, is here today to talk about that process, that history, what's happening now and what's ahead in the future. And also with us is the head of the William Davidson Foundation. William Davidson, Bill, as you may know, owned the Detroit Pistons, the Detroit Vipers, the Detroit Shock, and the Tampa Bay Lightning, and he won championships with all of them. He should have bought the Lions, too. Please welcome Ethan Daniel Davidson. Have a seat, have a seat. Now, this is not a 60 Minutes interview, but we are here to learn something about who they are and why they're here. And Robin, I want to begin with you because I think you share something in common. You both love music. You both love this city, but you both initially declined the leadership roles you now have. Robin, I heard you wanted to be a TV anchor woman when you were a little girl.
It's true. I did. My grandmother, Esther Gordy Edwards, always wanted me to be involved with the museum, and it just wasn't the thing I was passionate about. And so as much as she pressed, I just, no, that's not it. And then, look up today, and it's the thing I care most about.
You would have made a great anchor woman, by the way.
I would try.
No question about it. Absolutely. And Ethan, you took a long and winding road to get back here. For years, you were a singer, musician, songwriter, traveled the country, the world. You lived in Alaska for a time. What made you finally come back?
Well, yeah, I was on the road for years, traveling the world, touring as a musician. I had worked for the Pistons on and off at different times. And the last tour that I had ran 6 straight years. And, I think my father knew that I was going to take some time off. And he said, well, I want you to come back to Detroit. And I, no offense, but I swore that I would never move back to Detroit, to be honest with you. I'm happy to be here now. But he said, I want you to come back and work for me. I said, I'm still not interested in that. But he said, no, this is different. I want to start a foundation. I'm thinking about what comes next, and I want to invest in Detroit because I've always lived here. I built my business here, and I said, I'll be right there. As soon as I finish my contracts, I'll be in Detroit.
Well, Robin, what changed your mind? What made you decide that this is what you were meant to do?
It was just divinely guided. There's no other way to say it. My grandmother ended up ill. She had heart surgeries and wasn't able to return to the business. And I always, remember this moment. She lived in the Jeffersonian. And this one day, we're coming back from the hospital, and we sit in front of the Detroit Towers. And we're sitting there, and we had this conversation that seemed like it went on forever, but only had 3 words. And it was a passing of the mantle, the torch. And there was something about that moment. I would have done anything for my grandmother. My grandmother raised me from age 15 on, and I cared for her while she was ill. So there was nothing I wouldn't have done for her. But in that moment, I think what was interesting was that I was doing it for her. And it took my getting into it and honestly, spiritual intervention to help me find my why. And why is it important to me? And I grew to understand the power that Motown as a brand, as a story, as a beacon, as an example, as a symbol of excellence, what it can do to empower other people. And once I made that connection, similarly, it was like, oh no, that's my why.
That's right.
And so, that's what drives me.
You talk about that beacon. I grew up in the South, and in the early 60s, segregation was still very much alive down South. But when we could see the Supremes, the Temptations, and the Four Tops on the Ed Sullivan Show, it was much more than simply the joy of seeing these young African-American performers. It was a representation of ourselves as stars on the national stage.
Right. Absolutely.
And Motown was a beacon of hope of what was possible.
Absolutely.
Always. And I think about your father, brilliant businessman who made his initial fortune in glass, selling glass to the automotive industry and for structures around the world. But he was also a gambler.
Yeah.
He bought the Pistons for $6 million in 1974. It was eventually sold for $327 million, whatever. But he also, I mean, and it didn't make money. The team didn't make money initially. And he decided to move the team to the Palace of Auburn Hills, also a first. He decided to buy a plane for the team. Yeah. Yeah. So many firsts. What was it about your father that was such that he could see the future when so many of us were stuck in the here and now?
Well, you know, I think the thing that was interesting, and the part that you don't know as much, that we don't know as much, is, you know, yes, the team was losing money because that's what basketball teams do. But, you know, he, you know, and along with the guys that he had at that time, Jack McCloskey, Isaiah Thomas, those guys, they would look at the schedule and they'd say, you know, this comes to the idea of the plane and how do you actually get to make money with these things. They'd look at the schedule and they'd say, you know, if you could win 1 or 2 more road games, because you have a concept in basketball called schedule losses. It's not a game you're supposed to lose, but you lose it because of the travel. So you look at that and you say, that's a game we could win if we could control our own travel. And if we could win that game, we could get a couple more home playoff games, which could pay for the plane, and you make a little more money the deeper that you go into the playoffs. So between my dad and Jack, you know, Chuck, Isaiah, they kind of figured that out, and then it worked, and then everybody did it. But you got to look at the business, you know, with that, you got to get into it.
But right. It's still a gamble because not every team wins and not every franchise makes money.
You got 29 that lose.
Absolutely. And of course, when we think of empires and dynasties, we think of the men who built them. Berry Gordy building Motown, your father building a huge empire. But there were important women. Esther Gordy Edwards was amazing. She was not only the sister of Berry Gordy, she was a power in her own right.
Yeah, if it weren't for the women in my great-uncle's life, and he would tell you this too, there would be no Motown. And that's just the truth, yes. He would tell you the same thing, and it's, you know, my grandmother is one of them, but my great-grandmother is another one of them. He also had a wife, Raynoma Singleton, who actually found the Hitsville house. So there's other women. Some people don't know that a lot of the talent that first came to Motown, they were from a label called Anna Records. Anna Records was owned by my Aunt Gwen. So even before there was a Motown, there was a label. My Aunt Gwen had her own little independent company. She folded it to put all the support behind Motown. So artists like Marvin Gaye, David Ruffin, they came from Anna Records. So all of that to say, my grandmother, though, my grandmother was the only child out of her 8 siblings. She had 7 siblings, she was 8, she was the eldest girl. And she was the only one to go to college. She went to Howard University and Wayne State. And so she had a way of looking at life and looking at her siblings and their potential in a different way than they could. She could see farther than they could. And so when her little brother, at the time they call him Junior, when Junior said he wanted to get into the record business and start an independent label, she knew he wouldn't make it on his own, right? But she said, if you go into business, I'll go into business with you. If you go up, I go up. If you go down, I go down. And she said, I'll give you 2 years. And so she ran the business so that he could focus on the creative.
And it all worked so perfectly.
And it all worked so perfectly.
And of course, Bill Davidson, a billionaire, eventually. In fact, I think this year would have been his 100th birthday.
100th birthday.
In December, coming up in December.
Yeah.
But when you look at his history, he also gives credit to his mother.
Absolutely.
For his success.
Absolutely. You know, unfortunately, in our family and his family, a couple of the men died, you know, at a young age, tragically, and you know, and so then it was up to the women to run a lot of these businesses. His aunt was, as a matter of fact, one of the first female attorneys, probably in the state of Michigan, 100 years ago, when, you know, women didn't get law degrees. And his mother took over the operation of a number of the businesses. In fact, we were a family that owned movie theaters here in the city of Detroit 100 years ago. And my grandmother, who ended up running a lot of those theaters, sold, just as a piece of Detroit history, she sold I think it was the Linwood Theater to Reverend C.L. Franklin for his church. His daughter, I think, had a singing career, not with Motown, but, but that's how we got to know the Franklin family. Anyway, you know, because you lived in these neighborhoods, and so you knew each other. They didn't think about, you know, what religion people were, that kind of thing. They thought about, okay, who can we do business with? And in our family, it was the women that were doing the business and were managing these businesses.
And now we're entering a new chapter for Motown. You called up a few friends, Smokey Robinson, Otis Williams, the last surviving original Temptation member. They were all there at Motown just a few weeks ago to announce a grand reopening of the campus. What do we expect to see?
So that was exciting. That was it was the culmination of the first 2 phases of our expansion. And I just want to go back to my grandmother for just 1 second, even though I know there's pictures behind me probably showing the campus. But, you know, really it was my grandmother's vision. If my grandmother had not had the foresight to preserve that little house, Hitsville, USA, when everybody else, the company, was relocating, or not relocating, but moving to California to get into the movie business.
Barry Gordy left and went to Los Angeles. Your mother did not.
Our grandmother did not. No, no, no. She said, look, leave me that little house. And my grandmother always cared about like the next generation and like inspiring youth. That's all she cared about. And she somehow knew that the story of that house and the people who had been there would inspire in the future. She knew that. So she convinced him to leave her that little house. And the legacy that she created as an entrepreneur in her own right was to preserve that history so that here, years and years, over 60 years later, we still have it to look to. So what we are now doing is expanding on that vision and creating an entire campus that celebrates the legacy of Motown in Detroit. And that legacy includes that little bitty house that people travel from all over the world to see. From that little bitty house with the original recording studio, it now has its own I call it an academy. It's called Hitsville Next, where we encourage and we cultivate the next generation of entrepreneurs. We have artist development. You met Ben Will. Ben is from one of our poetry programs called Motown Mike. It's a poetry competition. It's incredible talent in the city. And now this 40,000 square foot expansion behind the museum, behind the original row of houses, is being erected to really create an incredible immersive entertainment and education experience. So her dream has now just gone to the next level.
And Ethan, you're a part of it too because you're on the board of Motown.
Thank you.
You know, I'll tell you, like, you know, being able to go around the world, different things, and say, hi, I'm Ethan Davidson, I'm with Motown. You know, like everybody knows Motown. And working with Robin these last couple of years, and, you know, when I started there, you know, obviously she's already a leader. But, you know, leaders evolve, and watching Robin evolve and become even more.
It's called a pandemic.
It's called pandemic. But I do want to say, like, we do, because that Studio A, if you haven't been to Studio, you got to go to Studio A. Studio A is pretty damn cool. That's changed the world, and I'll tell you,
that is the shrine.
But I want to tell you how cool it is. Like, we had a reunion, 30th anniversary of the Bad Boys there a couple years ago, and so we got all the guys down there, and they were jamming in Studio A, and Mark Aguirre, you know, Mark Aguirre is a bad boy, right? Mark Aguirre, when he stepped foot in that studio, he was in tears. He said, you mean this is where Stevie Wonder, and he was literally in tears. And man, that's Studio A.
Absolutely. And I don't know if you've ever been there, but it is a place you should go. It is a shrine to American music. Paul McCartney comes to Detroit, he goes to Studio A, Hitsville. Right. The Rolling Stones come to Detroit, they go to Studio A, because they know that's the place where magic happened so many years ago and still happens to this day. But I have to ask you too, Ethan. Your father was so powerful, his investment so wide. Did he ever come to you and say, look, this is what I want you to do with this foundation I'm leaving?
You know, some of my family members are here, and I think some of the people that worked with him at Guardian, and they could tell you that that was the last thing he would ever do. What he really liked to do as a leader and as a creator of businesses, and as really a developer of other people's talents. He wanted to give you the sort of the space and the resources that you needed to emerge as a leader, but he did not, the last thing he would ever do was give you direction. He really wanted you to figure it out on your own, and I think that was a big part of his success. When I did come back here, you know, I said, okay, so what do you want this foundation to do? And we argued for a year, literally. Unfortunately, it turned out to be the last year of his life. You know, I said, you've got to have a mission statement. He did not want to do that. And after really arguing for a year, he finally said, okay, you want some I want to tell you, the only thing I want to tell you is whatever you do, do it in Detroit. I always lived here. I built my business here. Give back to Detroit. And that's all I'm going to tell you. So, and then we still had to figure it out from there. But at least we knew Detroit.
Exactly, exactly.
And Joel, I just have to say this, and I know Ethan knows that I would say it whether you were sitting there or not. But the William Davidson Foundation was one of the first foundations to support the Motown Museum expansion. And we sit in a community called the Northwest Goldberg community. And this was a community that was made up of Jewish people and African American people, and there's this whole history between them. And one of your family's theaters was
the
located.
Avalon.
The Avalon was there in Northwest Goldberg. But it meant everything to us to have their support early on. Because you know, any dream, you need somebody to believe in it first. And the William Davidson Foundation was one of the first to do that. So I just, you know, if you guys will clap with me, because they did exactly what your dad would have them to do in investing in the city.
And that's another thing, too. The Davidson Foundation is doing so much, not only with Motown, but around the city. And yet you don't see the name William Davidson everywhere. Why is that?
Well, he was a very, you know, and you know, Joel, because you knew him and you saw him.
I knew the public.
You know the public guy, but which was not a lot of public with him.
Yeah.
He was not public very much at all, and he didn't like that sort of stuff. He was not interested in his name being out there. And people had really had, you know, if you look around, you know, he did a lot philanthropically in his lifetime, but if you look for his name, it was situations where people had to really convince him to put his name on it, because he was not interested in self-promotion, which was, you know, unusual for a man of his caliber and a sports team owner. You didn't get that. He was very unusual in that way. We took a page from his philosophy, a big page from his philosophy. You know, 80–90% of what we do, we don't put our name out there out of deference to him. We do put his name a little more than he would have, and I'm sure he wouldn't like it. On the other hand, he's not here to tell us no. And I want people to know what he believed in. You know, we as a family, we want people to know he was interested in leaders. He was interested in entrepreneurs. He was interested in economic development. He was, you know, a lot of what we do is Jewish. He's interested in the Jewish community. And that's why we made, you know, bets on and investments in places like Motown, because it's a worldwide brand, incredible leader. It's the kind of thing I think he would have done.
Well, you're not only a member of the Motown board, but you're also with the DIA, and you're chairman of the Detroit Opera. So obviously you love arts.
Yeah.
So are we going to see more of that?
I'm a frustrated musician. You know, I got to meet Smokey. I got to meet one of my heroes, Smokey Robinson, a month ago. But he's still not going to let me sing on one of his records.
So as people who have long been active in the community, in philanthropic efforts, what do you see as the future of Detroit?
Oh, wow. I think Detroit's at a really special time in its history, and I tell people that, you know, as we talk about what the museum is doing, but this is just a magical time to be in the city and see all of the investment in this city, all of the cultural gems that are being birthed out of, some being birthed out of the pandemic even, some really resourceful, creative things. There's more to do, though, and there's more dollars needed, because some didn't make it through that pandemic. But it's just a magical time to see the transformation, the investment, and just new life.
You know, I think, I mean, Robin's heard me tell this one before. I have a lot of, you know, kind of little strange ways that I put it. But, you know, if you set the sports teams aside, which are, you know, worldwide brands, Detroit is unusual in that it's a way that has, entrepreneurs here have created two brands that everybody in the world knows. Most cities don't even get one. Some cities might get one. Portland has Nike, Atlanta has Coca-Cola. We've got Ford and we've got Motown. Everybody in the world knows what a Ford Mustang is, and everybody literally in the world knows what when we played against the Lakers in the 88 and 89 finals, they advertised it as Showtown versus Motown. So that tells you like how much that has, transcended the little house on the boulevard there. And so this is a city that has built brands that has changed the world. And unfortunately, over the years, been the butt of a lot of jokes, right? But we need to, build upon that legacy of building things and having world transformational companies and brands and investing in entrepreneurs and having those entrepreneurs invest back into the city because, man, this is a city that has changed the world through automobiles and through music. I mean, there's no city like Detroit in the world.
And I'm sorry, I was just going to say this about, even the music culture.
You can applaud that.
You can definitely applaud that.
Somebody started.
We support that. But I was just going to make a quick comment about even the music culture in Detroit. There's so many wonderful, we just celebrated Jazz Fest. We know that we've got, there are all of these like record labels, independent record labels that are now making their way back to Detroit because there's so much talent in Detroit. The programs that we're doing out of Hitsville next generation of artists, they're coming out of those programs. We're now working with Motown Records, who is also a partner and stakeholder. I know that sounds weird when it sounds like we're not one and the same, but we are now working together to bring artist development back to Detroit because there's so much opportunity and there's so much good music here. So it's also a time where I think Detroit is, it's owning its authentic self. And the fact that music and music heritage run so deep in the city.
What would you tell the people here who are coming back, some of them for the first time in many years, some of them for the first time since they left? What would you tell them about their connection to the place that I hope is still home? What should they be doing?
I'd say check it out.
Yeah.
Go look. Don't forget about what you heard. Yeah. Go look. This is an incredible city at an incredible time. And if you were fortunate enough to have connection to it, you were either born here or you lived here for a minute, this is the time to check it out. There's magic happening in the city.
There's magic happening in the city, and it's, it is an incredible time to be here. And as I say, we don't really realize how important this city has been to the world and the way that it's shaped the world, and you get to be a part of that story. And, if you've been fortunate enough to build a successful business, we're ready for you.
Absolutely.
We're ready for you.
It's odd, sometimes you have to go away to realize what you've already had. Yeah. And I think that's true for a lot of people here. Because Detroit, once you live here, and I came here from Louisiana, but once you live here, it stays in your soul. This is now home for me, even though I wasn't born here.
Right.
Yes.
This is home for me, and I hope for you as well, that you will always consider this home and always consider this a place to invest your time, your money, and your talents.
Sure. For
Exactly.
Sure. For sure.
Absolutely.
Huge dividends. So what do you have to say about these two individuals, these family representatives?
Thanks. Well, come visit us on the boulevard down there,
If you haven't gone to see it, you have to go see the wonderful new plaza that just opened. It's, if you have trouble getting in, because we do sell out this time of year, just let us know.
Yeah. Now, can you turn non-singers into singers?
There were miracles at Motown, however.
there were miracles. Miracles, for sure.
So that can happen too.
Yeah, for sure.
All right.
For sure.
But there's such a wide array of things to do and see. And if you haven't been to the Motown Museum, if you haven't been to the DIA, if you haven't been to the cultural gems of our city, that's something you must do. Yeah. That's where you're going to find your soul again at these wonderful institutions.
Check out our award-winning riverfront.
Well, I was going to mention that. They talked a little bit before about, Mary talked stuff about the happening on the riverfront. And, one of our ways we frame things at the Davidson Foundation, we talk about communal assets, which is how we kind of get into Motown and the symphony opera, but also the riverfront. We have this great communal asset, something nobody else has, which is an international waterway at the edge of our city, which was underinvested for so long, right? I mean, how do you have something like that nobody else has, and you ignore it for so long, and it's an industrial space? Well, Ralph Wilson and others, and we got involved, said we've got to invest in that. I mean, that's something special, right? You can't throw that away.
Absolutely.
When you think about the future, are you grooming other members of the family to succeed you? Robin, you came by and succeeded your grandmother. You succeeded your father. Are you too grooming family members to step in when perhaps you're ready to leave?
We got to keep praying over that one. Yeah, right. my daughter and my son are both, actually my son is there, but my daughter, who I would think would be the one, she's just like me, and she's just like, yeah, Mom, now. She's very happy doing what she's doing.
Not yet.
Yeah, not yet.
Not yet. But they're all young. Ours are coming, just to be teenagers, so I'll let you know.
They too will have to go on a journey of self-discovery before
right,
they come
that's
back.
right,
Yes,
that's
exactly,
right.
exactly.
Sure.
But what about the future of the city itself?
Yeah.
You were here at a time of greatness, of majesty.
Yeah.
And you've also been here in a time of great decline.
Yeah, sure.
Will we see that great city on the hill again?
Oh.
100%, without question. The thing about Detroiters that's so beautiful, no matter where we migrate to in the world, is that there is a resilience about us, and there's a resourcefulness about us. And wherever we are, we will plant ourselves, and we will make something beautiful come of that. So there's no doubt in my mind the city will shine brighter than it ever has.
One of the biggest learning opportunities for me over the last couple of years is, we knew, that my father was, and this comes back to how the city's developing. We knew that my father was interested in business leaders and that. And, you had sort of an impression that at some point, and not that I share this, but I'm saying people had an impression out there that Detroit is a waste. There's nothing going on in there. But when we started to get into helping out entrepreneurs and mentoring, we were involved with Endeavor and other entrepreneurial ecosystem, things like that. And you realize that in all these neighborhoods, there were always people that had, even in the worst days of Detroit, there were always people in these neighborhoods that had catering businesses, hair salon, different sorts of things. There were always business people, operating out of their basement or operating out of their kitchen. And so how do we help, those people get, have access to financial instruments, right, so they can grow their business, or how do, that sort of thing, because that stuff is always going on. But you just don't know about it unless you get out there, as Robin says, get in there and see what's happening at the street level, and see what's happening. There's incredible things happening in the city, and we are, always rising from the ashes and always going higher, and it's a great time.
Well, thanks to leaders like you. You have taken the mantle of your families, and you are moving this city and your institutions forward. And we thank you very much for your presence and for your donations of spirit and kindness to this city. Robin Terry,
Thank you.
Ethan Davidson, thank you very much. Yeah. Outstanding. Anybody have a question from the audience? Well, look, thank you so much. If you have a chance, please talk to these wonderful people about Detroit, about the essence of who we are, what we do, and what we will become. I think you will be filled with the spirit of optimism that the best is still ahead for all of us. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Huel, for leading a really great conversation. We've had some terrific conversations over the years at Detroit Homecoming, and I'm very glad that one was among those that are videotaped. That was terrific. So if you are in town this weekend, Ethan mentioned that he chairs the board at the Detroit Opera, and there is a debut of a production, The Valkyries, Saturday night. And even if you don't think you like opera, you should check it out. Today was a very busy day in Detroit. If you tried to drive near Huntington Place, you know that because of the president's visit, a lot of things changed very quickly in terms of traffic patterns. But it was great because all eyes were on Detroit today because President Biden visited the auto show. But he's left the House, and so we are able to welcome our own Michigan Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist II to Detroit Homecoming. Now, he has many attributes, but one of my favorites is he's actually a Detroit Homecoming alum. A computer geek since the age of 5, he earned degrees in computer engineering and computer science from the University of Michigan and went on to a successful career as a software engineer at Microsoft. So if you've ever used SharePoint, well, you can thank him for his role as part of the development team. And not surprisingly, as an elected official, his goal is to use technology to solve real-world problems. Another goal is achieving equity for Michiganians. And as part of the Whitmer administration, he's co-chaired the Michigan Joint Task Force on Jail and Pretrial Incarceration. He also led the Coronavirus Task Force on Racial Disparities, which were quite evident in the early days of the pandemic. He and his wife, Ellen, live in Detroit, where they're raising their twins, Emily and Garland III, and their daughter, Ruby. Please welcome Lieutenant Governor Garland Gilchrist II to our stage.
All right, how we doing? Good evening, Detroit Homecoming. It is really, thank you. Somebody is energetic. What up, though? Thank you, Eric. I appreciate that. It is really a privilege to be with you on today of all days. There is, as she said, there's a lot happening in Detroit specifically today. The governor and I, did welcome the President of the United States to the North American International Auto Show for the first time that we've had it in person since 2019. We welcome the Transportation Secretary of the United States. And they're all here because, I'm a little biased, but I do think that what happens in Detroit, I think the world revolves around what happens here. Certainly our history, our legacy is of moving people, goods, services, ideas, and innovation. And so I'm proud that, frankly, this week is the kind of week we love to always have. We kicked it off with a $52 million investment here in Michigan by the Build Back Better Opportunity Grants Program. Last week, I welcomed the United States Secretary of Treasury to the Ford Rouge Electric Vehicle Center, where we are currently manufacturing the Ford F-150 Lightning that will bring electrified mobility to the #1 most popular vehicle in America and building that innovation right here in the state of Michigan. But I wanted to be a little bit more personal with you today because, frankly, if I could be so forward, I am Detroit Homecoming. It's my story for real, literally. All right, I'll tell you the whole story. So when I graduated from Michigan, I wanted to be a software developer. That's what I went to Michigan for. I was a double engineering major at Michigan, Go Blue, best college in history, University of the world. No doubt. So I wanted to be a software developer. And I interned twice at General Motors, but then I decided that, I didn't know that a car company was the best place for me. I wanted to work to be a software engineer. So I sat at my kitchen table, told my mother I wanted to go work at Microsoft. The next summer I interned there, did 2 additional internships, and went to work there full time. And it was fantastic. But I was immediately, I felt bad about leaving the place that made me who I am. I grew up the first half of my childhood 6 blocks directly north from this building. And I felt like it was important for me to be useful to the place that made me who I am. And so the first business I started as a side hustle working at Microsoft was called Detroit Intern, DetroitIntern.com. And the whole premise of that business was that if you could find an internship in the city, then you could find a job there. And if you could find a job in the city, Detroit, hence the name, then you wouldn't move to Seattle. That was the whole premise of the business. I started it with two friends who I had since kindergarten, one who's a University of Michigan Business School grad, and the other who's a University of Michigan Law School grad. They were trying to solve the Garland problem. And that business became a going concern. It was successful. It ended up selling to the Kellogg Foundation a few years later under the term urban employee. Thank you for giving me my first exit. But it was important to me to find a way to be useful to the place that I am. So I have 4 good years out in Seattle. I relocated my wife, Ellen, and I to Washington, D.C. the month after we got married. And there, the people who welcomed me to Washington, D.C. were a bunch of Detroiters. My birthday is September 25th. It was a month after we moved to Washington, D.C., and I was welcomed to that city by a bunch of people from Detroit. Because Detroit, for so long, our biggest export was our talent. And so that led me to start something called Detroit Diaspora in 2011, an organization that was meant to connect to help people find their Detroit community in whatever community they lived in. Cities all across the country, cities all across the world. And actually, I got a call from Cranes when they were thinking about doing this Detroit homecoming thing because they wanted me to help get people to it. So when I say that our stories are inextricably linked, I mean that. Being able to come home myself in 2014 to be able to serve the city that made me who I am when I worked in city government in Detroit, and now, thankfully, humbly, being able to serve the entire state of Michigan, building upon the experiences that I got as a child in Detroit and Farmington, as a professional in different parts of the country, and now as a public servant here in the city of Detroit and the state of Michigan. I represent what we want all of you to understand, which is that if you want to build a future that will change this community, change the state, change our country, and change our world, there is no better platform to do it upon than the Detroit platform. Now, certainly my job now is to make sure we can create the conditions for many, many more success stories to come from this community and from this state. And that's why we have invested so much in education. Our administration with Governor Gretchen Whitmer and I has invested more in childcare to connect 100,000 more families to free childcare here in the state of Michigan. More in K-12 education than in any administration in the history of the state of Michigan. More in creating tuition-free pathways to college so people can see themselves and their success in higher education here in the state of Michigan, and attracting the kinds of investment that are creating the jobs of today and tomorrow, the opportunities of today and tomorrow, inspiring the entrepreneurs of today and tomorrow so that they all can grow out and everyone can see just how powerful we are when we put our mind to something here in Detroit, Michigan. So all of you who have connections to this beautiful and amazing place, my challenge to you is how are you going to be more useful to making Detroit produce more people that can be as successful or even more successful than you are? Because that will be the legacy of this place. We create people who change things for the better. We create people who have better ideas, more energy, create more opportunity, and make more history than, dare I say, any other city in the country. So I want to thank you for choosing to participate in Detroit Homecoming here this year, and I hope to see you and feel your connection to make this community even stronger going forward. Thank you so much for having me here, and enjoy the rest of your time.
That was terrific. And that is the last of our formal program before we now leave this auditorium for a fabulous dinner outdoors. I have a couple of surprises yet in store, but this is the end of the formal program. So enjoy dinner, and I'll see you on the patio. Bye-bye.